Everyone knows Cedar Point. I mean, it is the coaster capital of the world. Basically, you're not considered a coaster enthusiast until you make your first pilgrimage to this amazing peninsula. This park is constantly expanding. Every year there's something new added, even if it's just an improvement to an existing attraction. I've held off on reviewing Cedar Point because, let's face it, every compliment will be overlooked by the naysayers and every criticism will be shredded by the Cedar Point fans. But I think the time has come and I'm ready to give my honest opinion of Cedar Point. Alright, let's get started. Park, atmosphere, and theming. Cedar Point is an amusement park, so it's not themed out. The best theming you'll find in the park is located in the back of the park, Frontier Town. But beyond that, it's an amusement park at heart. Cedar Point has done a great job with their gardens, foliage, plants, and overall atmosphere of the park. The entrance interacts with Gatekeeper, the wing coaster that does a zero-G roll right over the entrance. When the park added Valravn to their lineup, they did a much-needed improvement to that area of the park and even added a new small loop pathway that connects over to Blue Streak. The boardwalk section of the park looks great, and Cedar Point seems to be only improving this area. As an amusement park, I don't think the atmosphere can get much better than Cedar Point, so I think this category deserves a 10 rating. Rides and attractions. With the opening of the 2018 season, Cedar Point declared that they have the most rides than any other amusement park, with 71 different rides, which is pretty impressive. The park currently has 17 roller coasters, which isn't the most in the world. That record is currently held by Six Flags Magic Mountain at 19 different roller coasters, not including West Coast Racers, which is anticipated to open later this year. Before I dive into all the coasters, let's talk about the other rides and attractions. Cedar Point has two decent-sized kids areas located near opposite ends of the park to keep the younger ones entertained. But this is Cedar Point, and Insane Thrills is what they're all about. Max Air, Windseeker, Whitewater Landing, Power Tower, just to name a few, are some of the decent flat rides that the park has to offer. But this is Cedar Point. People come here for the roller coasters. Cedar Point doesn't disappoint when it comes to the roller coasters. Starting off with the best, Steel Vengeance is their star attraction that's loaded with airtime and overall just an insane ride. Maverick is another fantastic coaster that's located right next to Steel Vengeance, giving Frontier a great 1-2 punch. Millennium Force is another great classic steel coaster. Valravn seems to be a popular ride amongst GP, along with Gatekeeper. Of course, I can't forget Top Thrill Dragster, the roller coaster that's practically visible everywhere in the park. So with every great coaster that Cedar Point has, it also has a few duds to go along with them. Corkscrew, which proves to be a headbanger, is just one and done coaster for me in the park. Iron Dragon, though it is an enjoyable experience, it's getting up there in its age. Blue Streak, the park's only wooden coaster, has a few decent moments of airtime, but it's also a rough experience. Cedar Creek Mine Ride is a good ride for the younger ones, but it even has some rough spots. Gemini, the park's only racing coaster, is yet another great airtime ride, but at the same time it suffers from some rough areas, most notably near the end of the ride. Magnum XL 200 is another good airtime coaster, but just like Gemini, it can be rough at times. During my most recent 2018 visit, I noticed that Millennium Force was suffering from a rattle, which was quite unpleasant during certain sections of the ride, which is really disappointing because I like Millennium Force. Top Thrill Dragster, which is notorious for breaking down, surprisingly never went down during my trip, which is almost unheard of. I think my previous trip to this one, it went down like 3 times. Valravn and Gatekeeper also seem to be suffering from a slight rattle, which is very disappointing considering how new they are. Sure, depending on where you sit in the trains, the experience will vary, but I was let down by the headaches that I got from riding both of these coasters. I know that some might be thinking I'm being a little bit too critical of the roller coasters at Cedar Point, but it's Cedar Point. I have to be critical. This place is like the mecca for coaster nerds. Regardless of how I feel about some of the coasters, I'm still giving Cedar Point a score of 10 for their rides and attractions. Let's face it, Steel Vengeance practically earns a 10 for the park all on its own, let alone throwing in Maverick into the picture. Park food. I don't have much to say about this category. They have your typical theme park foods you'd come to expect. Sure, there are a couple notable places like The Melt, Chick-fil-A, Johnny Rockets, and I've only heard good thing about their barbecue in Frontier Town. I'll give Cedar Point a score of 8 for their food. Park staff. Just like every other amusement park, their staff are about what you would expect. I do think they do a great job on getting guests through their attractions, but again, nothing that wows me. I'd say that it's your typical staff, maybe somewhat above average. I'll give a score of 7 for park staff. Park value. Okay, so this is where I'm going to vent some complaints that I have about Cedar Point. Looking at their park admission, you'd think that Cedar Point is pretty well priced. I believe you can find tickets around $50, which is a decent price. However, let's look at what you really need to pay in order to enjoy a whole day at the park. First, there's the ever infamous parking fees that, well, basically every amusement park has. Cedar Point is no different, with a typical price around $15. Once you're in the park, I would strongly consider you picking up a Fast Lane Plus, not the normal Fast Lane, because it's basically useless. All the rides with the long lines are only on the Fast Lane Plus. During the midsummer and even during the Halloween events, the park can get really packed, meaning all the big ticket attractions are going to have a very long line. Steel Vengeance averaged a 3-hour wait on a daily basis. Maverick is somewhere around 2 hours, and if you wait that long just for those 2 coasters, that's literally half of your day. And you haven't even done a fifth of all the roller coasters in the park. So yeah, the Fast Lane Plus is almost mandatory if you want to do everything in the park, especially if this is your first time here. So the price for Fast Lane Plus varies daily, depending on how busy the park is predicted to be. The average price is something around like $110, but it can skyrocket upwards of almost $200. Don't get me wrong, it's great cutting through all the lines, but it'll put a dent in your wallet. During the 2018 season, Cedar Fair started to incorporate a locker policy, meaning nothing is allowed to be with you on your ride or wait in the queue, so you have to leave it with a non-rider or purchase a locker, which is around like $3 for 3 hours or something close to that. I think you can get an all-day pass for the lockers, which sounds like a more reasonable option now, but of what I hear, it only sticks with a locker that you reserve. So let's say you get a locker near the front of the park. You'll be walking over a mile from the back of the park to get your things. Also, to add to the confusion, not every roller coaster has a no cell phone policy, so you need to check out the rules and regulations. Finally, I want to talk about the drink pass, which costs something around $12, which is actually a great deal considering it gets you unlimited drinks. This is a great feature, especially since you can simply throw away your cup and get a new one with every refill. So, all in all, depending on what day you come to the park, trying to experience everything, you're looking at easily spending $200 plus. Sure, you can work it out to be cheaper, less expensive, especially if you're a season pass holder, which I'm sure some of my listeners are, but if you're new to Cedar Point and want to do everything, this is your best option. Unless you end up picking up like the best day to come to the park, expect long lines unless you want to pay that premium price. So for park value, I think a score of 5 sounds about right. Most of these prices are becoming typical for amusement parks, especially when you start throwing in the skip the line passes. Personally, I wish Cedar Point would just create like a one skip the line pass for Steel Vengeance, but I guess that wouldn't work since like everybody would buy it, defeating its own purpose. A score of 5 might sound a little low, but some of it's due to me protesting against their locker policy, which honestly feels like a cash grab, but with safety as their underlining concern. Okay, the final score comes to 8, which is a good score. Without introducing all the technical mumbo-jumbo that I do with my reviews, I would give Cedar Point a higher rating. But again, this park does have some areas to improve. If Cedar Point is your home park, some of these issues I bring up are probably not that big of a deal, since you can easily bounce in and out of the park whenever you please, so you're really never worried about most of those concerns. Most of these concerns I brought up are going to affect newcomers, or those who might only be visiting once a year or every other year. Also, in my review, I didn't even discuss the water park or the beachfront, which I didn't do either, but both look like fun and I just love to stay at their Hotel Breakers for a few days. That's where you're going to get the best experience. Guests at Cedar Point hotels get into the park about an hour early with exclusive ride time on 3 attractions, which vary on a daily basis, but it's mostly going to include like Steel Vengeance and Maverick. But yeah, it's great to get in before the other guests and marathon a few rides. Anyways, this looks like the way to experience the park. As I already said, there's lots of things to do at Cedar Point. You can bring the whole family as well, because they can enjoy the more tame attractions, which I didn't mention, but yeah, Cedar Point is a world-class resort, one that every coaster enthusiast should experience sometime. Well, thank you for watching today's review. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of Cedar Point? Was I being too critical or not critical enough? Please subscribe, check out more of my content, and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.